When I was a junior in high school, I was quite an odd kid. I liked having colorful hair, piercings, and all that kind of stuff. The school I went to was near Atlanta, so there weren't many people around like me. I tried to find friends that liked the same kind of music and other interests. I could normally kind of brush off any weird energy that people put off, ignore it. I just wanted some friends. Anyway, I was in gym one day hanging out with a group of weirdos, and there was a guy that I hadn't seen around before. He was wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt and jeans that were a size too small. His name was Ernest. We immediately clicked with each other, in a platonic way, because we laughed at a lot of the same things. We started hanging out in gym together every day, people watching and making fun of people play basketball. It wasn't too long until he started making fun of my appearance and making me feel absolutely terrible about myself. I had acne super bad in high school, and he joked around saying I had meth skin. First strike. Me being me, though, I kept hanging around him, and eventually it led to hanging out after school. He would invite me over to his house, and we only stayed in his room. He refused to let me see his family. His parents didn't really speak English, but I still wanted to meet them. I always thought it was weird that Ernest didn't know Spanish but his siblings did, and when he could speak words, it sounded like Russian. He pretty much only played It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia on TV and rambled about superheroes. He would always come up with these strange scenarios where he was an evil villain and talk about how much power he could have. Fast forward and I get a job at a pizza place. Ernest gets the same job at this pizza place, so inevitably we're always together. Always. He pretty much never let me out of his grasp. It got to a point where he took me to school every day in his PT Cruiser, which I still get chills every time I see one of those damn shoe-shaped ass cars. We started skipping school. A lot. I mean, we pretty much went to school about 2 or 3 times a week. This is where it starts to suck pretty bad. He started pressuring me to do sexual things with him. I don't really want to get into the details because it's pretty disturbing, but he manipulated the situation in such a way that I felt like we were in a relationship, because I thought that I needed him. He really convinced me that we were a couple, but I was so repulsed by him deep down that I could never fully accept that. He started telling our other friends that he had sex with me, and that we were in a relationship. I denied it all. To this day, I deny it. I've lied to therapists. I've lied to my own friends. But right now, I am admitting to all of that. At one point, he ended up living with me and my family in the same room as me. He had convinced my entire family that he was gay so that he could live with me. He literally dressed up in pink and put a scarf around his neck and pranced around my aunt trying to win her over with this fake personality. I was so used to living in chaos that this was barely a problem for me. During all of this, he was always a rude piece of shit to me. I remember asking him for a ride one day, can't remember where, and he said no, for no good reason. I started getting really pissed off because he couldn't actually give me a reason. He just kept smirking at me. He did this type of thing frequently. We were sitting in the living room and he silently got up and drove off somewhere, came back, walked back in, stared at me for 15 seconds and walked into my room. I heard a bunch of rustling, so I stormed in there thinking he's up to something sketchy. He's gotten completely dressed into his sleep pants with his hands in his pocket, and he just wouldn't take his hand out of there. At this point, I was scared. I forced my hand into his pocket and pull out a knife. I don't remember how the nights or days continued after that. Fast forward again. I'm at my best friend Kayla's party, and everyone is camping in the backyard. Ernest hated Kayla because she was a way out for me, in his perspective. She got in the way of us. I'm sweating typing this out because it's probably one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. The sequence of events is a little blurry, but here's how I remember it. I had made it clear to Ernest at this point in time that we were not a thing, and that he needed to let go of that fantasy. I had a crush on this boy named John, and we slept in the same tent together. Morning comes and I hear Ernest outside, asking people if they knew where I was. Someone said, "She's in the tent with John." I was scared immediately. I knew something bad was going to happen. The tent rips open. I don't have a shirt on. He begins screaming as loud as he can, cussing all of us out and just pitching an absolute fit. He storms off. He goes to his car and calls me. Tells me to get in the car now. Everyone there was freaked out, and Kayla advised me not to go to the car because she knew how scary Ernest was just as a person. I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable, so I figured that if I went to the car it would ease everyone just a little bit that he wasn't there. I went. As soon as the car door closed, we sped off. Fast. Really fast. I look over to him wide-eyed, and he's screaming and crying with absolutely no expression on his face, tears streaming down but emotionless. He says, "You were supposed to love me," over and over and over again. He starts speeding even faster and says to me, "If I can't love you, then no one else can." I'm actively having a straight panic attack in the passenger seat. I can't hear because my ears are ringing, and I can't see a thing. Meanwhile, Kayla had already called my mom. Somehow, my mom left the house fast enough to track us down in that PT Cruiser. He parks at a church and my mom is watching us. Ernest has a box cutter at his side. I get a call from my mom. I can't really remember what she said, but I know it was something along the lines of, "I'm gonna slit your fucking throat," to Ernest. He started coming to his senses, if you can even call it that. He decided to drop me back off at Kayla's and told me that he was going to kill himself after he dropped me off. Kayla and I were frantically trying to call his parents about a possible imminent suicide. However, they could not speak English. In the end, Ernest called the police on himself because he thought he was going to harm himself or potentially someone else. He was gone for a couple of weeks, and when he came back, he was parked outside my school waiting for me to come out. He runs right up to me. I noticed he had on a plaid button-up shirt, and it was tucked into his pants. It was extremely odd to me, and I knew immediately that this was a fake personality. He was speaking differently as well, very proper almost, like a few weeks had suddenly turned him into a saint. It wasn't long after that I admitted myself into a mental institution because I just kept having breakdowns. Everyone in the groups told me to get rid of him, and I hadn't realized how serious this was until I saw everyone's reactions to the stories. There are so many stories of this psycho that I can't even type it all out. I did get rid of him in the end. I found new friends. Without them, I don't know how this would have gone. I haven't seen or spoken to him in about 3 years. So let's not meet. Ever again. This story happened slightly over 20 years ago, back when I was 16. During this time, I lived with my mom and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. I had gone out to visit with my friends, being allowed to drive myself for the first time ever. I had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 p.m., with the caveat that if I was running late for any reason, that I had to find a payphone and call them. The night wrapped around me and my old 71 Chevy pickup, as there were no streetlights or houses for most of my way home. As I pulled up to the first of 2 stop signs, I could see an older sedan. Old cars are still pretty common in that area, stopped by the side with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited, as a man in his 30s or 40s started walking towards me from the driver's side. At this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing assistance to stranded people was a common occurrence. People can rapidly get into severe problems there by not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down, or not realizing that it's a fucking desert, and people die wandering delirious away from the highway, just trying to find help. Anyhow, I rolled down my window, and as he came abreast of my door, I could smell the liquor on him. I could see another man in the passenger seat. As this was before anyone I knew had cell phones, and the nearest payphone was a good 10-minute drive ahead, I didn't have any way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car had stalled, and asked if I could help them out. I asked him if his car was a stick shift, which it was, so I asked if he was familiar with push-starting it. He said yes, so I agreed to as gently as I could push their car with my truck while they turned the engine over. For anyone that isn't familiar, this is a way to start a manual car that's having battery or starter issues, specifically to get it somewhere to work on it. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and try to push their car physically. Push-starting the car worked without a hitch, but here's where things start to go south. They get back out and thank me. Then they invite me to hang out and have some fun with them. I decline. They pull off to the side of the road, and I continue on my way. Only, now they start following me. So here I am. It's 9:50. I'm running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I haven't given myself much leeway from leaving my friends. These drunk, creepy older guys have started to follow me on a road without any man-made lights except for car headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I thought to myself that maybe I'm being paranoid, so I turned down a road that I know gave me a couple of turnoffs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with the payphone. The car follows right behind me. I start thinking, shit. I take another turn that only leads to a couple of houses at the end of the road, and they turned in right behind me. I take another turn to loop around back to the gas station, and they follow again. So at least now I know they're following me, and not just heading home. At this point, my heart is pounding. I decided to try something to lose them. I pull over to the side of the road. I see them pull up behind me. I wait as the driver gets out of the car and begins walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me too. I wait until they almost get to my tailgate, and then I floor it. My wheels dig into the rocks, and poofs of dirt are causing a cloud behind me. With the leadway, I head towards the gas station. The gas station was deserted, but the payphone is showered in the light from the gas pumps. I call home and explain what's happening, and why I was running late. My stepdad asked if the gas station worker could be seen. I let him know I couldn't see him behind the counter, as he was probably in the back. I wasn't in trouble, but I was asked to hurry home. Thankfully, I made it back safe and sound. So to the two drunk idiots that wanted to fuck 16-year-old me on my first night driving by myself, let's not meet again. Before I begin, yes, I made a lot of dumb decisions. Yes, I probably should have called the police. But here goes anyway. When I was around 15, I lived alone in a 2-story house. Although there were bedrooms upstairs, I would sleep on the living room couch. This was for 2 reasons. It was the central location of the house, so I could hear everything around me, and it was equidistant from every exit. One night at around 2 in the morning, I heard somebody jiggling the front doorknob. It was a slow, cautious jiggle, like they were trying not to be heard. When the door didn't open, they didn't stop. The jiggling slowly became less cautious and more irritated. They persisted for at least 2 minutes. Then they went to the back door, which was also locked. I didn't want to call the police because at the time I was an unemancipated minor living alone. I didn't want to get placed into foster care, and I didn't want my parents in trouble for neglect. Eventually, the jiggling stopped. I stayed up that night, waiting for them to try the other entrances, but nothing ever happened. A few nights had passed, and I awoke to the sound of a door opening upstairs. The doors in the house would really stick, so they took a lot of force to open. When you popped them loose, they'd make a loud scrape, pop, and shuddering noise. At the time, I would take sleeping pills. It made it hard to fully awaken, and I'd sometimes only awaken with sleep paralysis. I couldn't determine whether I'd dreamt the sound or whether I'd awoken from it. I started to fall back asleep when I thought I heard the door close, like the grinding of wood rubbing together. Then I heard the sound of bed springs screeching, like a weight was being shuffled. I thought maybe somebody is homeless, and they thought this was an abandoned house. I was super tired, and wasn't even sure if I was actually conscious. I fell back asleep, and awoke to the feeling of somebody watching me. There were stairs parallel to the living room, and I could see them from the couch. Halfway down the stairwell, I could see a long-haired man crouched over and looking at me. It was dark, and I felt like we were both trying to verify what we were seeing. I kept a metal baseball bat by the couch and grabbed it. Slowly, the man erected his body, and without turning, he backed up the stairs. I just listened for him to leave, or waited for him to come back down, but I heard neither. It was like he just stood at the top of the stairs, waiting for me. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I heard nothing, even until sunrise. When I left for school that morning, I questioned what I'd actually experienced. I had my boyfriend over later that evening. As we approached towards the house, he pointed out, "Hey, your window is open." I looked, and the room to the sticking door was wide open. I told him what I'd experienced the night before, and he helped me check out the house. After finding nothing, I closed and locked all the windows. I figured it must have just been a hobo. Once they realized somebody lived there, they left. I stayed there that night, but I didn't take the sleeping pills. I awoke to the door opening again. This time I knew it was real. They knew somebody lived here, but they still returned. At this time in my life, I had very little value for my own life. I had no fear of death because I knew where I'd go. I decided that I wasn't going to hide in my own house. I got my baseball bat, turned on the lights, and went upstairs. I yelled out something like, "Listen, buddy, I'm coming up, so you better be out by the time I get up there." I heard nothing, and prepared for the worst. I checked the rooms and the closets, but found nothing. All the windows were still closed. I checked the downstairs and found nothing as well. I felt pretty silly after finding nothing, but I still stayed up that night. I got ready for school the next morning and saw that the window was open again. It occurred to me somewhere down the line that I hadn't checked under the beds when I'd done the search. I didn't have my bat with me and bailed. To think that an intruder was possibly hiding under the bed as I searched the house. That shit is spooky. But I'm partially relieved that I didn't check. If I'd bent down and come face to face with a man beneath my bed, the story may have ended differently. After binging about 12 hours straight of YouTube readings of this subreddit, my mind is in a dark place, though I can't entirely blame it. My mind goes there often. This happened 3 years ago, but requires some background. My best friend and I grew up in a sleepy wannabe New Jersey Central Florida town, and we were the outcasts. We had met in 6th grade, when I'd overheard her talking to another classmate about bionicles, my 11-year-old self's passion. We became fast friends, and soon we were inseparable. We began the gauntlet of sleepovers, birthday parties, and family gatherings. By that point, we were practically siblings. She was the first person I'd come out to as bisexual, and in turn, I was the first person she told about being trans. Her home life was tumultuous, though I can't say mine was much better. We often had a habit of taking refuge at each other's houses. Like I said, we became basically siblings. Her father was an alcoholic, strict and prone to physical discipline. Her sister was a stuck-up girl who soon gravitated toward the hicks and jocks when we entered high school. Her mother was a pseudo-vegan hippie love child held over from the 80s. When I was 23, herself 22 at the time, we'd had another long night of sleeping over in order for her to escape yet another fight with her mother. She had recently lost her job at Walmart, and I was going into my first shift at Taco Bell the next day. On the drive home the next morning, she excitedly told me that since she now had her own vehicle, she would be applying at pizza places that were in need of a driver. I was proud. It was the first time she'd hunted for a job on her own. I'd usually been the one to coax her to apply to where I was working, not that she ever lasted very long. My first training day went by quite well. My coworkers were friendly and tried to get me to talk more. My manager liked to playfully embarrass me, a fat white guy, by trying to get me to talk hood to the other workers. Being a training day, it wasn't a very long shift, but I had been up early in anticipation, and this was my first day on a job in a few months. I got home at around noon. I informed some of my internet friends that my first day had gone well, and at around 5 p.m. I started to bed down, drained from a pretty good day. As I was preparing to lay in my bed, though, I got a Steam message, her lamenting another fight with her mother and asking if she could come over. Now I had started to grow a bit weary of the fights on their end. I had begun to repair my relationship with my family and a few friends, and I had given her advice many times on how to better approach things. In my infinite wisdom and eagerness to sleep, I left the message unread and drifted off into slumber. At around 8 p.m., I awakened by her bursting into my room in a panic. Having just been ripped from a dream, I was groggy and disoriented. I dragged myself to the bathroom to relieve my bladder and came back to my room to find her rocking back and forth on my bed. It was at this time I noticed she's covered in blood, so I ask what happened. She informs me that she just saw someone murder her mother with a knife. My mind goes blank. In the deepest parts of my mind, alarm bells start ringing. Isn't the rocking back and forth a bit overdramatic? Why did she call me and not the police? But this is my best friend. I've known her for over a decade, and we were the only two people in the world we could count on. I suppressed it and go to inform my sister and stepfather. My mother had passed away the year prior, and it was roughly a month to the anniversary of her death. We were all in a dark place, antisocial as always. It was the only way we knew how to handle emotional issues. When I informed my family, they immediately go to the same place as I had, though they were far more vocal about it. I offered them excuses that I knew myself were flimsy, and returned to the room with the phone in hand. I convinced her to call the police, and I could hear her explaining the details over the phone. A man in a black ski mask. When the cops arrive, she swears up and down that it's most likely her father. They send cars over to check the crime scene and take her down for a statement. I ride with her in the back of the cop car over to the sheriff's office. It gets to be around 2 a.m. Her sister was brought in, as was her father. I have work the next morning and request to be taken home by an officer. It took me a long while to go to sleep that morning. The next day at work, I'm quiet, until my manager asks me what happened. I inform him but decide to work the rest of my training shift. When I get home, my sister informs me she had confessed. Her mother had threatened to kick her out for not being able to find and keep a job, and in a rage, she'd taken a knife and stabbed her repeatedly. My mind froze like a bad computer, and I turned to face my monitor. I was in a Discord call at the time, and all I could weakly say was, my best friend just confessed to murdering her mother, before hanging up and laying on my bed. Her last trial was the 7th of this month. I don't know the results, though my grandmother tells me she took a plea deal for life in prison rather than receiving the death penalty. And part of me wants to contest that, to demand that they take the death penalty for ridding the earth of such a peaceful and caring woman's shadow. A larger part of me is just glad she's being punished. You were my best friend, my sister, and my platonic soulmate. But please, let's never meet again.